What if I told you that 8 US states are more Canadian than American? From cultural identity to economic alignment, could these states realistically become part of Canada in the future? Stay tuned as we dive into political intrigue, economic synergy, and the surprising history that might just make these border states the next provinces of Canada. The idea of states seceding from the US may sound far-fetched, but when you consider geography, trade relationships, healthcare preferences, and even cultural values, the picture starts to change. In today's video, we'll explore 8 US states that hypothetically could align more naturally with Canada than with the United States. Number 8. Maine shares a long border with the Canadian provinces of New Brunswick and Quebec, creating natural economic and cultural ties. Many Maine residents have relatives across the border, and cross-border travel is part of daily life for some. The state has a large population of French-Canadian descendants, especially in northern counties. Maine's seafood industry closely mirrors that of Atlantic Canada, especially when it comes to lobster fishing. It also imports hydroelectric power from Canada, mainly through Hydro-Quebec. Politically, Maine leans more progressive, aligning with Canadian values like universal healthcare. Rural areas in both regions face similar issues like population decline and aging infrastructure. Canadian tourists often flock to Maine's beaches and national parks. In winter, Maine residents participate in snowmobiling and ice fishing, activities heavily enjoyed in Canadian provinces. Calais and St. Stephen are twin border towns with deeply integrated communities. Many bilingual schools and institutions in Maine offer French and English, like in Quebec. The local culture is filled with maple syrup, hockey, and Tim Hortons coffee shops. US Route 1 and Canadian Route 1 virtually align through this region. Maine's education policies and environmental regulations resemble Canadian priorities more than American ones. Historically, the Aroostook War was almost a tipping point for Maine to become Canadian. Culturally and economically, Maine already feels like a quiet extension of Canada. Number 7. Minnesota borders the Canadian provinces of Manitoba and Ontario, making it a natural partner in trade and culture. The state has a Scandinavian heritage that aligns closely with Canadian prairie values. Cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul share a social climate with Winnipeg. Residents enjoy winter sports like curling, ice fishing, and hockey, just like their Canadian neighbors. Politically, Minnesota embraces progressive policies that mirror those of Canada, especially in education and healthcare. The Great Lakes and shared waterways make environmental cooperation between the two regions necessary. Indigenous communities often have family ties that cross the border. Minnesota's love for nature conservation and outdoor living fits perfectly with Canadian ideals. The state's low population density and cold climate resemble those of Saskatchewan or Manitoba. Both regions emphasize bilingual education and multicultural inclusion. Trade between Minnesota and Canada surpasses billions of dollars annually. Minnesota's healthcare expansions under Medicaid resemble Canada's universal healthcare system. Many Canadians study or work in Minnesota, and vice versa. Canadian media and products are popular among Minnesotans. In cultural tone, governance, and lifestyle, Minnesota feels like a northern province already. Number 6. Washington shares a border with British Columbia and maintains strong trade and cultural relationships. Seattle and Vancouver are seen as twin cities in terms of tech, culture, and progressive politics. Washington exports billions of dollars in goods to Canada annually. Environmental policy in Washington is among the strictest in the U.S., matching Canadian standards. Both regions are leaders in clean energy and sustainability efforts. They also collaborate on conservation projects involving the Pacific coastline. Indigenous nations in Washington and BC often work together on treaty issues. Ferry systems in Puget Sound and BC's coastal areas are nearly identical. Cross-border commuting for work is common in the region. Washington's cannabis legalization and health initiatives resemble those of British Columbia. There are many joint tech ventures and climate agreements with Canadian provinces. People in Washington frequently watch Canadian news and television. Vancouver residents often shop and vacation in Seattle, and vice versa. The Cascadia movement advocates for regional unity across this shared territory. In every major way, economy, culture, and values, Washington mirrors Western Canada. Number 5. Michigan and Ontario are tightly connected through the automotive industry, manufacturing, and trade. The Detroit-Windsor Tunnel physically connects Michigan to Canada, allowing for daily cross-border traffic. Both economies rely heavily on auto exports, forming a shared industrial hub. Hockey is a major part of life in Michigan, similar to Canadian provinces. Michigan has large populations of people with Canadian roots, especially in the Upper Peninsula. The state shares 4 of the 5 Great Lakes with Canada, promoting joint environmental efforts. Both regions have cold winters, lake-effect snow, and ice fishing culture. Universities in Michigan often collaborate with institutions in Ontario. Many Canadian tourists visit Michigan's lakes and national parks. Michigan's political centrism aligns with moderate Canadian values. Health policy debates in the state often cite Canada as a model. Bilingual signage and French language programs are present in several communities. Trade between Ontario and Michigan exceeds $70 billion annually. Cross-border sports rivalries are intense, especially in hockey. With strong economic and cultural ties, Michigan could easily feel at home as a Canadian province. Number 4. Vermont lies just south of Quebec and shares deep cultural and historical connections with French Canada. The state is known for its progressive policies, similar to Canada's national values. Vermont was one of the first U.S. states to support universal healthcare initiatives. It has a strong French-Canadian heritage, especially in its northern towns. Vermont's rural charm and small-town governance resemble Canadian provinces like New Brunswick. The people enjoy cross-country skiing, maple syrup festivals, and environmental activism. Canadian tourists frequently visit Vermont for its ski resorts and scenic landscapes. Many Vermont families have relatives across the Quebec border. The state's dairy and agricultural industries trade with Canada regularly. Politically, Vermont shares Canada's social safety net priorities. Burlington, the state's largest city, has a culture similar to small Canadian cities. Canadian flags are sometimes seen during local parades and community events. Vermont schools often offer French immersion programs. The state promotes multiculturalism, much like Canada. Culturally and ideologically, Vermont seems like a natural northern partner. Number 3. Alaska borders the Canadian territory of Yukon and British Columbia, sharing vast wilderness and similar climates. The indigenous populations of Alaska and Western Canada have strong cross-border cultural and historical ties. Alaska and Canada cooperate on Arctic research, climate change response, and wildlife conservation. Both regions rely heavily on natural resource extraction, especially oil and mining. The Alaska Highway connects the U.S. state to Canada through Yukon. Winter sports and remote living conditions are common on both sides of the border. Many Alaskan policies regarding land and environment mirror Canadian approaches. Alaska's small, scattered population resembles that of the Canadian North. There are shared emergency response agreements between Alaska and Canadian provinces. Fishing industries in Alaska and British Columbia often coordinate regulations. Canadians frequently travel through Alaska to reach other northern destinations. The shared concerns over climate change have fostered long-term cooperation. Culturally, both regions value self-sufficiency and indigenous sovereignty. Alaska's rugged lifestyle matches Canada's northern provinces. If any U.S. state could blend into Canada's vast frontier, it would be Alaska. Number 2. North Dakota shares a significant border with Manitoba and Saskatchewan, along with cultural similarities. Its economy is based on agriculture, oil, and natural gas, just like Canada's prairie provinces. Many farmers in North Dakota use Canadian equipment and trade across the border. The rural lifestyle and weather are almost identical on both sides. Hunting, fishing, and snowmobiling are deeply ingrained in both cultures. The population density is low, and communities are tight-knit and cooperative. Cross-border Indigenous nations foster shared traditions and governance. Political discourse in North Dakota occasionally aligns with Canadian-style libertarianism. There's a shared focus on family, tradition, and self-reliance. Agricultural universities collaborate across the border. Healthcare debates in North Dakota often reference Canada's universal model. Trade relationships with Manitoba and Saskatchewan continue to grow yearly. Canadian tourists visit North Dakota for shopping and family. Local radio stations even pick up Canadian signals in border towns. In values, lifestyle, and economy, North Dakota fits seamlessly with Canadian prairie culture. Number 1. New Hampshire borders Quebec and shares historical ties with French Canada. The state's northern region is influenced by French-speaking communities and customs. Winter tourism is huge, with many Canadians crossing the border to ski. Like Canada, New Hampshire values environmental preservation and forest conservation. Towns near the border celebrate both American and French-Canadian heritage. The White Mountains attract thousands of Canadian hikers every year. New Hampshire's politics are a unique mix of conservatism and social tolerance. Many Quebecois own property in New Hampshire, especially vacation homes. Cross-border shopping and gas trips are routine in border towns. French-language media is accessible in many communities. The state supports strong public education systems similar to Canadian provinces. Cultural festivals often include French cuisine, music, and traditions. Residents are polite, community-driven, and environmentally conscious. Local leaders have proposed cooperative agreements with Quebec on infrastructure. If one looked past the flag, New Hampshire could easily be mistaken for part of Canada. So, could these 8 states really become part of Canada? Probably not anytime soon, but if borders were drawn based on values, economy, and culture rather than politics, it might just make sense. Whether it's the snowy towns of Maine, the tech hubs of Washington, or the resource-rich lands of Alaska, these states show us that nations are more fluid than we think. Let us know in the comments. Which state do you think feels most Canadian and why? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into global geography and political hypotheticals.